Welcome to the Hindi Daily.
Glad to be here for today's deep dive.
Yeah, and I want you, the listener, to just imagine something for a second.
Uh,
Imagine grinding away at your job for like 16 years, only to find out the government just passed a law making it essentially illegal for you to ever get promoted to the top spots.
oh, that is a rough thought.
Right. Or imagine surviving a heart attack not because of, cutting edge medicine, but simply because you happen to live on the right side of some invisible municipal border.
Yeah, geography basically dictating survival.
Exactly. So today we are diving into this amazing stack of 8 different sources, and they all orbit this one central, really fascinating question. What happens when the rigid top-down systems we build, like laws, city limits, medical grids, collide with the messy, complex reality of your actual human life?
It's such an interesting tension because whether we're talking about national security or deeply personal identities, there's always going to be this heavy friction when rigid rules try to capture human fluidity.
Totally. So let's jump straight into our FAQ section. Article 1 is about a boundary that dictates entire careers.
Yeah, and it's the perfect place to start, honestly. Administrative boundaries can be incredibly unforgiving. We're looking at the newly introduced Central Armed Police Forces, or CAPF, General Administration Bill of 2026.
Right, one from March 25th.
Yes, and this piece of legislation legally reserves the absolute highest posts in these forces for Indian Police Service, or IPS, officers who are brought in on deputation.
Okay, wait, let's break down what deputation actually means here because it sounds a bit like bureaucratic jargon to most people.
Fair point.
Essentially, we're talking about officers from the national IPS cadre being like parachuted into the top leadership roles of a completely different organization.
That's exactly it. And the numbers are stark. The bill reserves 50% of Inspector General posts, 67% of additional Director General posts, and a full 100% of Director General and Special BG posts strictly for these outside IPS officers.
Wow, 100% of the top jobs. So nobody from inside can ever reach the absolute peak.
Right. And, the mechanism driving this bill is actually a direct clash between the government and the judiciary. Because back in May 2025, the Supreme Court looked at this exact practice and basically told the government to stop.
Oh, really? So this bill is a direct response to a court order.
Yeah, it's a legislative pushback. The court ruled that the CAPF, which includes massive forces like the CRPF and the Border Security Force, is an organized service.
Okay, what does that mean legally?
It's a specific legal term, meaning the personnel within it have a fundamental right to their own defined internal promotion pathways. So the court ordered a progressive reduction of these IPS deputations.
I see. So this new 2026 bill is the government's way to legally override the court and keep those top spots reserved.
Precisely.
Man, think about it like this. It's like spending a decade in the marketing department, knowing the whole business inside and out, only to be told the CEO role is legally reserved for someone transferred from accounting.
It's a huge source of friction.
You have over 10 lakh personnel in the CAPFs. A newly minted assistant commandant might spend, 16 years in the field without seeing a single promotion.
Yeah, up to 16 years without moving up.
While an IPS officer of the exact same seniority is getting 3 or 4 promotions and then just dropping in to be their boss. That's wild.
Which obviously creates immense structural tension on the ground. Now, to be impartial here, the government's perspective on this is purely logistical and strategic.
Right, they have their reasons.
They argue that because the CAPFs are deployed across various states for internal security, they absolutely have to work hand in glove with local state authorities. And the government believes that having IPS officers who, operate within both state and central cadres at the helm is the only reliable mechanism to ensure smooth center-state coordination.
That makes sense from a top-down national security perspective. But if you talk to retired CAPF officials and opposition lawmakers, they see this completely differently.
Not really differently, yeah.
They argue it systematically demoralizes the entire force. You're asking people to put their lives on the line, but placing this hard, impenetrable glass ceiling over their heads based solely on the acronym of the service they joined.
Exactly. It's a rigid boundary drawn around leadership. And, while it's incredibly frustrating when a bureaucracy puts a hard ceiling on your career, that friction becomes completely devastating when that same legal system tries to define your actual human identity.
Oh, yeah. That's a perfect transition to our second FAQ article. We're moving from career boundaries to social boundaries, specifically looking at a recent Supreme Court ruling regarding scheduled caste or SC status.
Right. The case of Chinthada Anand. He's a pastor from the Madiga community in Andhra Pradesh. And on March 24th, the Supreme Court ruled that he could no longer claim SC status.
Because he had converted to Christianity, right?
Yes, exactly. And this is a prime example of a rigid system failing to map onto lived reality. The court's ruling rests on the Constitutional Order of 1950.
Okay, let's unpack that order. What does it actually say?
It contains a very hard boundary. It states that no person professing a religion different from Hinduism, Sikhism, or Buddhism can be deemed a member of a scheduled caste.
So the legal mechanism here is entirely theological.
Exactly. The court reasons that Christianity, as a theology, does not recognize the institution of caste. Therefore, legally speaking, the moment you convert, your caste status is erased.
Wait, hold on. I'm genuinely confused by that logic. I mean, this man literally held a government-issued caste certificate, right?
He did, yes.
He had the paperwork proving his historical and societal disadvantage as a member of the Madiga community. How does the court justify taking that away just because his personal theology changed? Like, does the law assume that reading a different holy book magically shields you from the systemic generational poverty of the caste system?
And that is exactly the contradiction that critics and activists point out. The law basically treats social disadvantage as something that can be toggled on and off by religious conversion.
Which is just not how society actually works.
No, it's not. And what makes this even more complex is how incredibly difficult it is to reverse. Let's say someone wants to reconvert to Hinduism, Sikhism, or Buddhism to regain their SC status. The burden of proof is immense.
They can't just declare it.
Nope. The court demands what they call unimpeachable evidence of a bona fide reconversion. And crucially, proof that their original community has officially accepted and assimilated them back.
Wow. And the contrast with how the government handles scheduled tribes, or STs, is just wild to me.
It's a completely different mechanism, yeah.
Because for scheduled tribes, there is no religious bar whatsoever, right?
None at all. ST status is determined by tribal identity, customary practices, and community life. You have hundreds of ST communities that practice Christianity or Islam, and their status is perfectly secure.
So you have this massive social policy where disadvantage is defined strictly by theology in one category, but by community practice in another.
Exactly. Now, there is an ongoing commission under former Chief Justice K.G. Balakrishnan examining this exact issue for Dalit Christians and Muslims. Their deadline is in April, actually, but until they report back, that 1950 boundary remains absolute.
It just shows how a single line in a 70-plus-year-old order can completely alter a family's access to education and employment today.
It really does.
Well, let's move to our third FAQ topic. We are shifting from national social boundaries to national environmental targets because we see the exact same friction when massive government ambitions try to interact with the physical reality of the power grid.
Yes, India's updated Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, for climate action.
The numbers they are pushing are highly ambitious. India is officially committing to generating 60% of its installed electric capacity from non-fossil sources by 2035.
And they also plan to reduce the emission intensity of the economy by 47% compared to 2005 levels.
Which sounds phenomenal on paper, right? Especially considering India actually hit its previous 50% clean energy target early. They hit it by 2026.
That's a huge milestone.
Yeah. There's even new data showing that India's carbon dioxide emissions in 2025 grew at the slowest rate since 2001, if you exclude the COVID year, obviously.
Driven largely by a drop in power sector emissions. But here is where the top-down system collides with reality.
The paradox of these global pledges.
Exactly. Because tracking groups point out that practically no country is actually hitting the targets needed to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius.
Yeah.
The global boom we are seeing in solar and wind, it isn't happening just because politicians signed a piece of paper.
Right, it's economics. The mechanism driving the boom is plummeting technology costs and massive industrial competition, particularly cheap Chinese manufacturing flooding the market.
Spot on. And when you look at the ground reality in India, the contradictions are glaring. We are celebrating this massive 60% clean energy target, but simultaneously, the government is planning to build 100 gigawatts of new coal-fired capacity over the next 7 years.
100 gigawatts of new coal while touting clean energy.
Yep. And even crazier, there are over 37 gigawatts of renewable capacity just sitting there, completely stranded.
Right, 37 gigawatts stranded. Why? I mean, if we have the solar panels and the wind turbines, why can't we use the power?
Because the physical infrastructure cannot support the top-down ambition. Renewable energy is highly intermittent. A solar park produces a massive surge of power at noon, but absolutely nothing at night.
Obviously, yeah.
To use that power, the grid needs advanced battery storage facilities and high-capacity transmission lines to move the electricity from, say, a sunny desert to a cloudy city. And right now, that grid readiness just isn't there.
Man, it's like we're celebrating building a massive fleet of high-speed bullet trains, but we totally forgot to lay down the tracks for them to run on. So the trains are just sitting in the station looking shiny while everyone is still taking the old coal-powered bus.
That is the perfect analogy. The administrative grid is just not ready for the reality of the technology.
And, a lack of grid readiness isn't just an energy problem, it's a healthcare problem too.
A severe one.
Let's move into our science section with Article 4. Because when the administrative infrastructure fails in healthcare, the consequences are immediate. I want you to imagine a scenario. Imagine you wake up with severe chest tightness. You do exactly what you're supposed to do. You go straight to your local rural clinic. But instead of saving your life, the system tells you to start driving.
It's terrifying. And this is the actual reality for patients like Jasram Khanna. He's a farmer from Uttarakhand. He went to his local primary health center, or PHC, with chest pains, but they didn't even have a functioning ECG machine.
Not even a basic ECG.
No, they just checked his blood pressure and sent him to a town 55 kilometers away.
55 kilometers while having a heart attack.
Yes. And when he arrived there, no doctor was available. He eventually had to travel to a charitable hospital 70 kilometers from his home just to get an ECG that finally confirmed he was having a major heart attack.
That's unbelievable. How long did that whole journey take?
From the moment he first sought medical help to just getting a basic diagnosis, 4.5 hours had passed.
4.5 hours. In cardiology, there is a fundamental rule. Time is muscle.
Right.
Every minute that passes, more of your heart tissue permanently dies.
Exactly. The global medical standard is that a patient should receive an angioplasty within 2 hours of their first medical contact. But in India, patients average between 6 and 12 hours to reach proper care.
Because surviving a heart attack in India right now is barely about medical science. It's almost entirely about geography.
Geography and sheer luck. The systemic gaps are staggering. The primary health centers are designed to be the first net to catch a patient, but like we saw, they lack the fundamental tools.
And even if you get diagnosed quickly, getting the actual angioplasty is a geographic lottery. India has roughly 2,500 specialized cath labs capable of doing the procedure, but they are overwhelmingly concentrated in major urban centers.
And nearly 90% of them are private facilities.
Which introduces another massive boundary, the financial one. If 90% of the life-saving facilities are private, what happens to rural or low-income patients?
They face catastrophic financial ruin, or they get turned away entirely. I mean, the government has insurance schemes like ABPMJAY, which are designed to protect the poor, but the reimbursement rates the government pays are so low and often so delayed that private hospitals frequently reject patients using that insurance.
So the hospital essentially says, we won't accept this, go somewhere else.
Exactly.
So your heart is actively failing, the clock is ticking, and you are being bounced from a private clinic back onto the highway to find a crowded public hospital. The medical grid is completely disconnected from where the patients actually live.
Geography dictates survival. And, because authorities recognize that geography dictates efficiency, we are seeing cities literally trying to redraw their own maps to fix this.
Which brings us into our spotlight section, starting with Article 5. We're looking at urban geography in Hyderabad.
Right. Hyderabad just completely blew up its policing boundaries.
Driven by this explosive outward sprawl, right? With the historic city center and the western IT corridors just expanding relentlessly, the government issued an order reorganizing the entire region into 4 distinct commissionerates.
Yes, so now you have Hyderabad, Cyberabad, Malkajgiri, which used to be Rachkonda, and a brand new future city commissionerate.
The scale of this restructuring is massive. To give you an idea, the Cyberabad jurisdiction shrank from 42 police stations down to just 23.
And the overarching mechanism they're trying to fix here is called the span of control.
Right.
When a police jurisdiction becomes geographically too massive, the senior officers are located hours away from the edges of their territory. By carving the map into smaller, tighter units, the theory is that bosses can oversee their stations more effectively and respond to local crises faster.
And some of it makes intuitive sense. For example, the international airport used to be under the Cyberbad police, which confused a lot of
Yeah,
people.
that was always strange.
So they moved it back under the main Hyderabad city police, so travelers know exactly who is in charge. But I have to push back on this fundamental logic. Does drawing a new line on a map actually solve street-level crime?
This is the valid question.
I mean, if I'm a criminal, I don't care about the commissioner border. Doesn't splitting one giant police force into 4 separate ones just create a massive coordination nightmare between 4 different police bosses?
It absolutely does, and we are already seeing those fractures. Traffic management, for instance, became an immediate disaster in December.
Oh, really? What happened?
Well, major thoroughfares like Sardar Patel Road were suddenly split down the middle between different police jurisdictions. So if there was a jam, officers from one zone literally couldn't coordinate with the next zone to clear it because of the new borders.
You're kidding.
No. They actually had to walk back some of those changes and consolidate the traffic corridors again.
That is the ultimate bureaucratic Band-Aid.
It really is. And urban planners point out an even deeper insight here. A city isn't just one physical place. It is actually a stack of invisible maps all sitting on top of each other.
Like layers.
Exactly. You have the police map, the municipal water map, the public transit map, and the electricity grid. Redrawing the police boundaries doesn't fix the city if the water board and the transit authority are still operating on the old lines.
You haven't organized human life, you've just created overlapping silos that are constantly warring with each other for jurisdiction.
Beautifully put.
It's such a powerful image-invisible maps fighting each other. But as messy as redrawing physical maps can be, it is nothing compared to what happens when the state tries to redraw the map of human identity.
Which takes us to Article 6, our second spotlight piece.
Yeah. What happens when the government actively erases people from the legal map?
This is happening right now in Karnataka with the passing of the Transgender Persons Amendment Bill 2026, which just passed on March 25th. This legislation fundamentally rewrites the legal definition of who is recognized as a transgender person in India.
And the implications are profound. The mechanism of this bill is entirely exclusionary. It explicitly limits the definition of a transgender person strictly to sociocultural identities, like the Kinner or Hudra communities, and to individuals with intersex variations.
Right.
It completely excludes trans men, and it legally erases anyone whose gender is self-perceived outside those specific traditional categories.
And crucially, it rolls back the landmark 2014 NELIPS Supreme Court judgment. That judgment gave individuals the fundamental right to self-declare their gender.
Which was a huge victory at the time.
Massive. But this new bill strips that right away. Now, to be legally recognized, a person must present themselves before a government-appointed medical board for approval.
Having to prove your internal identity to a panel of government doctors just feels incredibly invasive. And there is a deeply punitive criminal element to this bill as well, isn't there?
There is. The bill introduces severe criminal penalties, a minimum of 10 years to life in prison for anyone found guilty of enticing or coercing someone into surgeries to assume a transgender identity.
10 years to life. Wow. So we need to present both sides here carefully. What is the government's stated rationale for all of this?
The government's logistical rationale is to protect state welfare schemes from fraudulent claims and to ensure that only genuine transgender persons receive benefits. They argue they need a strict boundary to administer policy effectively.
But the reality on the ground, according to activists, is terrifying. Activists like Christy Raj and Akai Padmashali argue that forcing a rigid top-down federal definition onto the community completely ignores regional history.
Absolutely. They point out that Karnataka has deep historical transgender identities, like the Jogama community, that do not neatly fit into the North Indian Kinner definition.
So by defining it so narrowly, the law effectively renders thousands of people legally invisible.
And the criminalization clause creates a massive chilling effect. I mean, think about how this plays out in reality. Often, young transgender individuals face severe abuse at home and run away to seek refuge with community elders. Under this new law, an elder who provides shelter or guidance to that youth could easily be accused of enticing them into the lifestyle, suddenly facing a decade in prison.
It weaponizes the community's own support networks against them.
Exactly. And the historical weight here is painful because Karnataka has historically pioneered transgender rights. They were the first state to introduce a 1% job quota for transgender individuals in government jobs back in 2021.
Oh, I remember that.
The activism there is deeply grassroots, led by working-class individuals. So this new national law is basically a rigid federal bulldozer trying to pave over a complex, lived reality.
It is the ultimate example of trying to force human fluidity into a tightly sealed bureaucratic box. And, the struggle against the establishment's rigid definitions isn't just a political or social issue. It happens in the hard sciences, too.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's transition into our magazine section with Article 7 and the incredible story of Jeewanu.
This is one of the most fascinating examples of scientific gatekeeping in modern history. In the 1960s, a pair of chemists at the University of Alapa, Krishna Bahadur and his wife S. Ranganayaki, published an astonishing claim.
What did they claim?
They stated that by taking a simple mixture of basic chemicals and exposing it to natural sunlight, they had synthesized tiny blue spherical structures that actually grew, multiplied, and showed basic metabolic activity.
Bahadur named these structures Jeewanu, which translates from Sanskrit as particles of life. They were essentially claiming to have created protocells in a laboratory in India.
Right.
Okay, pause for a second. For those of us who haven't taken biology in a while, what exactly is a protocell and why is this such a big deal?
Think of a protocell as the architectural blueprint for a living cell. It isn't fully alive in the way a bacteria is, but it is the crucial stepping stone between dead, inorganic chemicals and actual life. It's a tiny, lipid-like bubble that can encapsulate chemical reactions.
Okay, got it.
If you can prove that simple chemicals in sunlight can spontaneously form these bubbles, you have potentially answered how life originated on Earth.
That is Nobel Prize level territory.
It really is.
But the global scientific establishment didn't celebrate them. They completely crushed them. The rejection was fierce and honestly deeply personal. Prominent Western scientists, including NASA researchers and a well-known biochemist named Sidney Fox, aggressively dismissed the work.
Fox actually sent Bahadur a letter accusing him of self-deception and calling his research a crime against humanity.
A crime against humanity over chemistry? That's insane.
The establishment had decided what valid origin-of-life research looked like because Bahadur and Ranganayaki used very rudimentary methods, literally putting flasks in the Allahabad sun. And frankly, because there was immense prejudice against their Indian origin, the gatekeepers refused to even seriously test their claims.
They just accused them of looking at contaminated lab equipment. It's like they discovered the architectural blueprints for a house, and the scientific establishment yelled at them because they didn't bring a finished brick.
That is exactly what happened. But here is the incredible twist. Fast forward over half a century to 2023.
I love this part.
Researchers Shashi Thutapalli and Nayan Chakraborty at the National Center for Biological Sciences, NCBS, in Bengaluru, decided to finally look past the prejudice. They rigorously recreated Bahadur and Ranganayaki's original 1960s experiment. And when they looked through modern microscopes, they found the blue spheres, they found the protocells and the lipid-like molecules exactly as described.
It is so heartbreaking. Bahadur and Ranganayaki had this visionary glimpse into the origins of life. Their own daughter recalled how deeply saddened her father was by the relentless mockery, yet they meticulously preserved all their notes, hoping the future would vindicate them.
And it finally did. The researchers at NCBS are clear that they haven't created life from scratch, but they validated that the foundational chemistry Bahadur described is real and highly plausible.
The Western establishment's rigid boundary of what constituted proper science literally delayed this entire line of inquiry by 50 years. It just shows how a closed system stifles discovery.
It's a tragedy of wasted time, really.
But, Bahadur and Ranganayaki pushed through the silence of the scientific community to leave an undeniable legacy. And for our final piece today, Article 8 in the magazine section, we are looking at a man who built an entire universe out of physical silence.
The legendary modern artist Satish Gujral.
Yes. There is a massive centenary retrospective of his life's work happening right now at the National Gallery of Modern Art, featuring over 160 works. And you cannot understand Gujral's art without understanding the profound physical and emotional boundaries he was forced to live within.
True.
At just 8 years old, he suffered a terrible swimming accident in a river in Kashmir that left him completely deaf.
And on top of that profound sensory isolation, he came of age during one of those violent periods in modern history. At 22, he lived through the absolute trauma of partition.
Yeah, his family was actively involved in rescue operations, right?
Yes. He personally helped transport abandoned women and children across the newly bleeding borders. The sheer, uncontainable grief of that experience saturated his early, haunting paintings in the 1950s.
But Gujral refused to let his trauma or his deafness become a cage. He traveled to Mexico, apprenticed under the volcanic muralist Diego Rivera, and returned to India determined to put art on massive public walls.
And the mechanism of how he worked is entirely tied to his lack of hearing. Because his ears were silent, he engaged with the world primarily through touch, weight, and material resistance.
That explains why he was so restless with his mediums. He didn't just paint, he moved into burnt wood, ceramics, and massive architectural design. He needed to feel the mass of the world in his hands.
Exactly. And there is this incredible detail in the source material about his relationship with sound. Late in his life, technology caught up, and he received a cochlear implant. For 2 years, he actually had his hearing back.
Wait, really? He got his hearing back?
Yes, but he made a profound choice. He chose to have the implant removed.
Wow. Why?
He explained that the constant influx of sound fractured his concentration. He didn't view his deafness as a deficit to be cured. He viewed it as the necessary sensory condition for his genius. He built his entire inner world inside that silence, and he actively preferred it.
He turned a physical boundary into his greatest studio.
He really did.
But there is one final invisible boundary in Gujral's story, and it's about who the system chooses to remember. His wife, Kiran Gujral, was a brilliant ceramic artist in her own right. But for their entire marriage, because of his deafness, she acted as his sole interpreter.
She was the bridge between his silence and the world. She translated the world for him and translated his brilliance back to the world.
And the exhibition actually features her dressing room as part of the architectural display. Yet, as so often happens, her authorship, the immense daily labor that held his universe together, remains largely invisible to the public archive.
The historical archive meticulously remembers the man who filled the world with beautiful forms, but it struggles to categorize the woman who made those forms possible.
It all connects, doesn't it? The lines we draw on city maps, the rigid definitions we write into law books, the borders of what science deems acceptable, and even the limits of our own bodies.
Today we've looked at laws, maps, medical grids, and the limits of our own senses. It begs the question, do the systems we build actually exist to organize human life, or is human life just a constant, resilient effort to survive the systems?
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.